This is the most ridiculous Olympic story you're gonna hear this week. It's a story about twisted human experiments, rat poison, and near death. This is a story about the travesty of the 1904 Olympic Marathon. Now in 1904, the Olympics were run by a man named James Sullivan. He was a man that was as racist as he was incompetent. Okay, now a quick perspective. On average, during the Olympics, 90% of athletes usually finished the marathon. But in 1904, out of 32 competitors, 17 didn't finish, and one got disqualified. Now on a typical marathon route, you would have 12 water stations spaced throughout the run. But in 1904, James Sullivan decided we would only have one water station. Yes, one water station for the entire 25-mile race, because James Sullivan wanted to study purposeful dehydration, even though dehydration is potentially fatal. But let's get on with the actual race. Let's start with the conditions. Now, experts say the ideal temperature is between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit at the time of the start of the race. They started the race at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and the temperature was over 90 degrees in the humidity of Missouri in August. The roads were mostly unpaved, covered in inches of dirt. They had to dodge cars, mailmen, wagons, people walking their dogs. Now, on to the competitors. The previous year's winner of the Boston Marathon was John Lorden, and he was the early favorite. The race also included 10 runners from Greece who had never run a marathon in their lives. Now, Felix Carvajal, a mailman from Cuba, was a dark horse. He raised money to get to the United States by gathering donations as he ran across Cuba. He used the donations to buy a boat ticket from Cuba to New Orleans. Felix had made it to the United States, closer to fulfilling his dream of competing in the Olympics. So Felix is in the United States, but before he can get to St. Louis for the Olympics, he loses all of his money gambling on a game of dice the first day he arrives. He then half walks, half hitchhikes all the way to St. Louis with no money in his pocket. Felix arrives in St. Louis the day of the marathon event, showing up to the starting line in the typical runner's attire of heavy street shoes, long johns, and the traditional runner's beret. There were also two of the first ever African men competing in the Olympics, Len and Jan. Both showed up to the starting line barefoot. The runners do 5 laps of the stadium before exiting to the streets of St. Louis. Remember the early favorite, John Lorden, the guy who won the Boston Marathon the year before? He started vomiting immediately from all the dust he was inhaling, and then even he drops out of the race. Michael Spring, the guy who won the Boston Marathon just a few months prior, he drops out of the race because he couldn't breathe due to all the dust clouds. Another near fatality was William Garcia of the United States. The dust clouds had coated his esophagus and ripped his stomach lining. Remember, this is the Olympics. Oh yeah, remember Felix? Now Felix hasn't eaten in 2 days. Remember, he lost all of his money gambling. A short time later, Felix veers off to the side of the road to an apple orchard, picks an apple up off the ground, eats it. It turns out to be rotten, ends up getting stomach pains, and decides, I need to take a nap. Remember our 2 barefoot runners from South Africa? Well, Jan finished 12th, and Len, he finished in 9th. But only because halfway through the race, he got chased off the course by a pack of wild dogs. And yes, for all of you playing clusterfuck bingo at home, I said wild dogs chased off an athlete during the Olympic marathon. And it's about at this time that Felix wakes up from his nap. Feeling a little bit better from his rotten apples, gets up, starts running again, and finishes 4th. He took a nap and still finished 4th. Now, 9 miles in, or about a third of the way through the race, Fred Lors, who's in a respectable 4th place, collapses due to heat exhaustion, and he drops out of the race. He's done. So, he hitchhikes his way back to the stadium. But then that car breaks down. Still 6 miles out from the stadium, Fred, who's a little bit recovered from his stomach cramps, jumps out of the car and says, I'm just gonna run the rest of the way. He runs all the way into the stadium and of course, finishes first place. Until a few minutes later, when they found out that he had cheated, they took his gold medal away and then banned him from the Olympics for life. Fun fact, the following year, he would appeal the ban and win because he pled insanity. And of course, the following year, he ends up winning the Boston Marathon. Now, Thomas Hicks of the United States was another strong runner. He was winning the race halfway through. Instead of cold water during a marathon race, his coaches sponged out warm distilled water into his mouth, as well as giving him a concoction of egg whites, rat poison, and brandy. Yes, rat poison, because at the time it was believed that rat poison was a stimulant. So this is technically the first case of doping in the Olympics. Now, Thomas Hicks, dying from the poison he was given, can now barely move his legs. About 1 mile out, Hicks starts hallucinating, thinking that instead of 1 mile out, he's actually 15 miles out. Hicks then pushes through, gets into the stadium. His coaches pick him up and carry him, feet dragging through the stadium all the way to the finish line. He finishes second, or first, I guess. Hicks lost 8 pounds during that race. Doctors later said that if Hicks was given one more dose of rat poison, he would have died on the racetrack. The final standings were Hicks in first, Corey in second, and Arthur Newman in third. Although, having to be carried by your coaches across the finish line should have disqualified him as well, which moves my hero Felix into third place, claiming the bronze medal that he absolutely deserved. Now, in the description below, you can buy a t-shirt that commemorates Felix, because this is America. Oh, by the way, James Sullivan, he's fully enshrined in the Track and Field Hall of Fame. Several athletes nearly died during this event, the stupidest event in sports history. And then the guy who thought it would be a cool experiment to use the Olympic marathon as a test for dehydration on humans is in the Hall of Fame. Oh yeah, and if you want to check out an illustrated children's book on this marathon event, check out Megan McCarthy's book on Amazon, linked below. If you liked that video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe.